You don't know what's real and what isn't with him. Like you need to feel important. I'm just a patsy.
Good now, everyone, and welcome to a podcast episode where we talk about history's most infamous fall guy. I will be joined today by Lee Harvey Oswald specialist David Savino. But before we jump into our guest interview, I wanted to give a brief summary on who Oswald was. Lee Harvey Oswald was born October 18th, 1939, making him a Libra. He was originally from New Orleans, but in his childhood he moved around a lot. He grew up without a father, had two older brothers, and then he devoted his life to Marxism. And eventually he ended up moving to the Soviet Union, where he met his wife. He eventually moved back to the United States in Dallas, Texas, where he remained until the assassination of former President John F. Kennedy. When the Warren Commission was produced, Oswald was the sole blame for the president's assassination, but conspiracy theories to this day still wonder what happened. And today, I'm hoping to clarify those questions for you, or make you ask more, in welcoming Mr. Savino. There are three main points I'm going to go over. I would like to talk about, his general childhood or his general life. I'd like to touch on Jack Ruby just a little bit, and then mostly the year of 1963 and the important connections and points within that year that kind of define the case as a whole.
Sure.
How would you describe Oswald's childhood?
Um, Oswald grew up as a boy without a father, without a real father figure, a very dominating and self-absorbed mother who had men coming in and out of her life, none of which really Oswald could look up to as a father figure. And she was so, um, as I said, self-absorbed that she really didn't have much affection or love to give to him. So he had two other brothers who have basically said the same thing, that it was a difficult childhood. They moved all the time. I think he moved 11 times by the time he had gotten to third grade. So really, there was no stability um, in his childhood, and there was no love or affection, or there was no male role model.
Would you say this lack of civility really impact him or led him more to communism?
I think, it was around 15 years old when he was handed a pamphlet about socialism and then kind of went down that rabbit hole. I think it wasn't socialism or communism so much at that point. It was just something that he needed to set him apart from others, to make him feel he had this complex where he needed to feel superior, or like he needed to feel important. And at this time, and he was born in 39, so that would have been mid 50s. I mean, we're smack in the middle of the Cold War. So no self respecting American has anything to do with communism or socialism. So this obviously set him apart and garnered him attention, even if it was negative attention.
Thank you. Now, moving on to Jack Ruby. What connections do we see Jack Ruby having in this case outside of just murdering Oswald?
Okay. Well, again, this is where it gets a little shadowy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, After Ruby shot Oswald, he was asked, obviously, what his motive was, why he did it. And he proclaimed publicly that I'm a patriot. He shot our president, and he also stated that he wanted to spare Jackie and the kids, John Kennedy's two small children, from having to come back to Dallas and go through a trial. Because at that point, there would have been a trial in Dallas. And as a matter of fact, at that point in history, basically a local murder, just like somebody had been shot in an alleyway that day in Dallas, it would have been treated no differently. And so it would have been a local, there would have been a trial in Dallas. So that's what he stated publicly. Now, as we peel back the onion, we find out that Ruby, who owns this kind of sleazy little club in Dallas, has mafia connections, mob connections, going back to his early days in Chicago with the Giancana crime family. And up until that point, when that started coming out, most Americans bought into it was a lone gunman. Oswald shot Kennedy, and this guy Ruby did what we can't say it publicly, we can't say these things, but privately, we all kind of felt like, good, I'm glad he did it. He did that for us. That we all hated Oswald at that moment because he took our beloved president from us. And so at that point, we all kind of bought into that narrative. And then when we found out about Ruby's kind of connections, his shadowy connections, that's when the conspiracy theory started to evolve. This looked a little too neat. It looked like a mob hit. It looked like the mafia shutting somebody up because they didn't want them talking. Now, then you start going down that road. What could Oswald have talked about if he was the lone gunman? Well, Ruby shooting him maybe proves that he wasn't the lone gunman, that there was more to this than meets the eye. Or maybe Ruby is exactly what he said he was. I don't know if you've seen there's a film clip when the Warren Commission met. They were obviously interested in talking to Jack Ruby, but Jack Ruby was in prison in Texas. So Chief Justice Warren and another member of the Warren Commission went to Texas to meet with Ruby. And it's on film. And Ruby basically says to Chief Justice Warren, please take me to Washington. I can't talk here in Dallas. The truth of what happened will never come out because the powerful men that made this happen won't allow it. Again, he didn't come out and name names. And basically, 3 years later, in 67, when he died, his deathbed confession, he basically said the same thing. He said that the truth about what happened, he said it was a overthrow of the government, and the truth about who was behind it and what happened will probably never come to light. So Ruby is a very interesting character. The problem is he doesn't name names. And he was not, and Chief Justice Warren did not take him to Washington, D.C. He said, we don't have the apparatus to make that happen. And so he never went any further with it.
Okay, thank you. Now, I do have more questions that will kind of lead from the vein of interviews, and that's kind of further down on my list, but I might go ahead and skip to that. So speaking of interviews, I remember when I heard you speak in the class, you kind of let us ask you questions, and you would respond how Lee Harvey Oswald would have in the interviews. How would you say his demeanor was in the interrogation?
Okay. The interesting thing about the interview is he was interviewed for about 12 hours over the course of from Friday afternoon till Sunday morning. And it was off and on. And they would bring him in. He would be interviewed by Captain Fritz of the Dallas Police Department and some other individuals. They would take him back to his cell, and then there would be another round of interviews. Nothing was recorded. According to the Dallas Police Department, they didn't own any of this in 1963. It still doesn't excuse this, but they didn't own any recording equipment. It boggles the mind that these interviews were not recorded. There were no notes taken in the interviews, which is ridiculous. And so all we have are notes that were written by the participants in the interviews, but these notes were written after the fact. So it's basically their recollections of what happened and what was said in the interviews. Now, as far as the demeanor of Oswald, most of the people who interviewed him said that he was cool, that he was calm. His demeanor changed when the FBI came into the room. FBI agent James Hosty, who had spoken with Oswald previous to the assassination. And according to Oswald, Hosty had intimidated Oswald's wife, Marina. And so Oswald became very angry when Hosty came into the room and started asking questions. He banged the table with his fist and accused Hosty of trying to intimidate and trying to basically badger his wife. Other than that, he asked for representation. He wanted a particular lawyer from New York City that he kept asking for. He asked if he could make a phone call, and he was told that he could if he wanted to. He said he didn't have any money to make a phone call, and they told him, of course, this is dating all of this, but he was told he could call collect. In other words, charge the person that he was actually calling. And he repeatedly said, I did not shoot the police officer, J.D. Tippit, and I didn't shoot John Kennedy. I didn't shoot anybody. He was taken from the interview room, which is basically Captain Fritz's very small office, and he was taken back and forth to his cell. This is Captain Fritz's words. There were hundreds of people in the police station, which again boggles the mind because you have this man who has been arrested for killing the president. Emotions are high. People might want to do him harm. You would think that police station would be on lockdown, but there's all kinds of people in the police station. And every time that Oswald was in the hallway being shuttled back and forth from the office to his prison cell, he was basically accosted by reporters shouting questions at him. And you can see, and this is on film too, you can see he maintains his calmness. He seems perturbed, annoyed by the questions. He repeats that I did not shoot the police officer. He says, I did not shoot anybody. And then at one point, he says that I'm just a patsy. And I think one of the main points was that all of these previous assassins of presidents and famous figures basically declared, after they had been caught, declared that they had done it because whoever they assassinated was a tyrant and they were trying to do this for the common good and for the people. And Oswald goes the opposite direction and not only claims he didn't shoot the president, but says that I've been set up. I'm a patsy. I've been set up. I've been put in this position by others. So his demeanor for the most part was cool, calm, which surprised a lot of people because of basically the charges against him. And it only changed when that FBI agent who he disliked entered the room.
So, going back to when you had mentioned that, he was cool and calm and collected in a situation in which most people probably would be incredibly stressed out. I mean, he's in cuffs being interrogated by police, most people would probably be like losing their mind or freaking out, being like crying. We see many interviews where people are just stressed out, but being calm and collected in that situation, how do you think that kind of connects?
Oswald said that, as a matter of fact, in one of the interviews he was in, he said, I've been through this before. He had defected to the Soviet Union earlier, and obviously the Soviets sat him down and interviewed him constantly because they weren't sure who this American was who was coming to the Soviet Union. Is he a spy? What's his deal? And he even alluded in the interviews he was in Dallas, alluded to the fact that in the Soviet Union, they are very hard in their interviews. They even get physical in the interviews. And he said to his interviewers in Dallas that this is the soft version. You're all acting like you're my friend. You're trying to coax information out of me. I think it was and he was interviewed by the FBI after he returned from the Soviet Union. So he had been through this process of being interviewed before. And I think he recognized how he was being treated. I also think that part of his superiority complex fit into this. He thought he was an important man, superior to others. And I think that it wouldn't do in his mind to get rattled. In his mind, this is how someone like him would handle a situation like this.
Thank you. I'm going to take a step away from the interviews and actually go to the year of leading up to, and I want to focus in specifically on March of 1963. What would you say is the significance of the type of gun Oswald purchased in March of 1963?
Well, as you know, it was a cheap Italian-made Italian war rifle from World War II, bolt action. Um, it's it's not really the type of weapon that you would use if you were planning what he was planning. Of course, when he bought the rifle, he couldn't be planning the assassination of John Kennedy because the trip in November hadn't been planned yet. So there's no way that Oswald could know that Kennedy would be there. Oswald claims that he didn't own a rifle, that he never purchased that rifle, that rifle was planted on the sixth floor. As a matter of fact, in his interview in Dallas, Oswald, when they asked him, "Do you own a rifle?" he said no. And he said, "I've seen a rifle in the book depository building just a few days ago. One of the supervisors was showing a rifle to some other employees." Now, he didn't go into that any further. And as far as I know, I've never seen where if the Dallas police asked that supervisor, "Why did you have a rifle?" According to Oswald, you were showing a rifle around. Why did you have a rifle in the book depository building? Anyway, that's the only rifle he actually talks about in the interview. Says, "I never purchased a rifle. I didn't own a rifle." So Oswald would say, "There's no significance to me purchasing that kind of rifle because I didn't purchase that rifle."
On the gun topic, you've heard of the single bullet theory. Could you explain what it is and your opinion on it?
Okay. Single bullet theory was put forth by the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission had a problem. According to the Warren Commission, it was an open and shut case. Lee Harvey Oswald fired from the sixth floor of the book depository building. He fired 3 bullets. The reason why they came up with the number 3 is because 3 shell casings were found at the sixth floor window where Oswald purportedly fired from. According to the Warren Commission, one of those bullets hit John Kennedy in the head. Another bullet struck John Connally, the governor of Texas, who was seated in front of Kennedy in the middle seats of the limousine. And according to the evidence, there was a shot that missed. There was a man standing further down on Elm Street when the shooting occurred, and he was watching the motorcade. And as the bullets were being fired, he felt something on his cheek, and he put his hand up, and he found some blood on his cheek, and he looked down and noticed that a bullet had struck the curb where he was standing and obviously sent up a shard of concrete or something and cut open his cheek. He wasn't badly wounded or anything, but the FBI basically carved that piece of concrete out of the curb and took it and tested it. And yes, a bullet hit it. So now the FBI has their 3 shots. One hit Kennedy in the head, one hit John Connally in the back, and another one hit the curb. The problem with all of that was that there were more wounds than 3 bullets could cover. And they couldn't go beyond 3 bullets because if they went beyond 3 bullets, they also had a timing problem. The question was, could Oswald fire 3 bullets in 5.6 seconds? That was the time the Zapruder film gave for the shooting. And if the Zapruder film is basically a clock of the assassination. And so if you add up all the frames of the Zapruder film from when Kennedy is first reacting to a bullet hitting him until the last bullet when Connally is hit, then it's 5.6 seconds. The question became, can 3 bullets be fired in 5.6 seconds? So they brought in FBI sharpshooters. They put the Oswald rifle in their hands and they timed them operating this rifle. Well, they could get off 3 shots in 5.6 seconds. So the Warren Commission was satisfied. Yes, it can be done. The best riflemen in the world can do it. The problem was these riflemen they got off the shots in 5.6 seconds. What they didn't do is they didn't fire at a moving object during that 5.6 seconds. So could it be done? Yes. It's possible, but it's not probable that it could be done. So I'm sorry, let me go back. The Warren Commission had the 3 shots were Kennedy and then 2 in Connally. The problem was the 4th shot then emerged. That was the one that hit the concrete. So now they had 4 shots in 5.6 seconds. You can't get off 4 shots. It's not humanly possible to get off 4 shots in 5.6 seconds. So they concocted the single bullet theory. They had to stick with 3 shots. Well, how can 3 shots have caused all the damage? Well, they decided 1 shot hit Kennedy in the head. That shot is spoken for. There's nothing you can do about that. 1 shot hit the curb. That's not disputed. So now they had 1 bullet left that had to do all of the rest of the damage in Kennedy and in Connally. So they invented the single bullet theory, which states that a bullet entered the rear of Kennedy's neck, exited through his throat, traveled forward on a downward angle, struck John Connally in his upper back, entered John Connally's upper torso, smashed his 5th rib, exited his chest, then struck his right wrist, destroyed his wrist bone, exited his right wrist, and then lodged in his left upper thigh. So the bullet travels and this is why some people refer to, we call it the single bullet theory. Some people refer to it as the magic bullet or the magic bullet theory, because there are people who claim that no bullet in the history of bullets has ever acted in this way. And by the way, we have that bullet. It was found on a stretcher in Parkland Hospital when Kennedy and Connally were driven to the hospital after the shooting. And that bullet is in the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. And the bullet is what they refer to as pristine, meaning there is no damage to the bullet at all. It is a clean bullet. There was no trace of blood or skin tissue found on it, which some people claim isn't possible. The bullet went through 2 men and went through skin and struck dense bone like the wrist bone and a rib in Connally, and yet was not deformed in any way. So then the question became, can a bullet do that? Can a bullet go through 1 human being, strike bone, and come out in pristine condition? So they did tests with ammunition, just like the Oswald bullet, and they shot into gelatin, which simulated skin or the soft tissue of a human body, and it came out pristine. But then they fired into the rib cage of a goat. They fired into the wrist bone of a human cadaver, and the bullets were badly deformed, which made most conspiracy theorists say there's no way that a bullet could have done all of the damage in Kennedy and Connally and come out looking the way it came out looking. But the single bullet theory was basically the Warren Commission's attempt to keep it to 3 bullets because they couldn't have a 4th bullet because of the timing issue. 3 bullets meant 1 shooter from the 6th floor window, and it was a neat package. Oswald did it. No questions asked. That's what we'll put out in our report to the American people, and the American people will buy it, because in 1964, when the report came out, that's what the American people did. We bought what the government told us. We trusted our government in those days. That was before we learned in later years with Watergate and Vietnam and everything else that our government doesn't always tell us the truth about things.
To kind of take a step back from everything and ask if you could kind of paint us a picture about how the 48 hours after the assassination kind of went for Oswald. After the bullets were fired, how did he kind of respond and react, and what happened after that?
Okay. Now, of course, the only way we know a lot of
Mm,
this is from Oswald being asked questions in his interrogation. And again, you can take that at face value, or you can say because the notes were recollections of what was said that things could have been left out. So again,
mm,
that can feed into conspiracy theories as well. But anyway, as far as what we've been able to piece together after the shooting, Oswald. Now, Oswald was in the first floor. He was asked this, where were you at the time that Kennedy was shot? He said, I was in the first floor. I was on the first floor eating lunch. I went to lunch a little after noon. Kennedy was shot at 12:30 from the sixth floor window. He was on the first floor in the cafeteria eating lunch. He said, after I finished lunch, I went into the second floor break room to get a Coca-Cola. Um, and I was standing in there with the Coke in my hand when the door to the break room opened up, and a police officer brandishing a pistol pointed it at me and said, "Who are you? Are you an employee?" And of course, at this point, Oswald, would have said, "I didn't know why the president. I didn't know the president had been shot. When the president was shot, I didn't go outside. I was eating lunch inside, and I didn't hear any gunfire. So this this police officer points a gun at me, and before I could answer, my supervisor came in right with the police officer and answered for me. Told the police officer, he's an employee. He's okay." And so the police officer holstered his weapon at that point, left the room. The supervisor looked at me and said, "The president's been shot." And then the supervisor followed the police officer. They eventually went up to the sixth floor. Oswald apparently at this point left the break room, went outside and was talking with some people outside, including his supervisor, who mentioned to Oswald that, there's no way anybody's going to get any more work done today because the police are going to be all over the building and everything. And Oswald said in his interview, because he was asked, why you were the only employee who left the building after the shooting. Why? And he said, because I didn't think there was going to be any more work. And they were kind of loose we didn't even have to punch in and punch out at the place. They were kind of loose as far as their schedule. So I left. It appears that Oswald got on a bus, and later on, when he was arrested, he had a little bus transfer ticket in his pocket. The bus got stuck in traffic, and so he got into a cab and paid 85 cents for a cab fare to the room that he rented nearby in Dallas. He went into the room. He changed his clothes because he claimed that they were dirty. He had a .38 revolver in the room. He put it in the waistband of his pants. He put on a jacket which covered the .38. He left his rental room, and he started to walk to downtown Dallas to go to a movie theater to watch a movie. It's about 45 minutes now since the assassination, about 1:15 p.m. He's walking along the sidewalk when a police cruiser starts to shadow him very slowly on the road. And then the police cruiser pulls up next to Oswald. The police officer, J.D. Tippit, gets out of the car and he walks out in front of his car. He's kind of coming around the front of the car to approach Oswald on the sidewalk. And this was broad daylight, 1:15 at an intersection where other cars and people were. And people said that they saw this interaction. Nobody was close enough to hear what was said between the two men. But as the police officer approached the man pulled out a gun and shot the police officer 4 times, twice in the head. J.D. Tippit hit the road, fell backwards, hit the road, and he's dead immediately. Witnesses say they saw the man who shot the police officer then run away on foot. The next time we see Oswald, he's now in downtown Dallas, and he's walking along the sidewalk, and there are police cars and police action everywhere. Not only was the president shot, very recently, but a police officer apparently now has been shot close by. So there's police sirens everywhere. Oswald ducks into the front of a shoe store, and the shoe store manager is looking out, sees Oswald duck in and kind of hide himself from the turmoil out on the street and police cars going by. The shoe store manager views this as suspicious. And after Oswald goes back out on the sidewalk and starts to walk again, the shoe store manager leaves the shoe store and starts walking behind Oswald, following him. Watches as Oswald goes into a movie theater, the Texas Theater, and then goes up to the woman at the booth of the theater and says, "I think the man who just entered the movie theater shot a police officer. Call the police." The police arrive at the movie theater a few minutes later. It's now about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a Friday afternoon. There's nobody in a movie theater at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. There's about a dozen people in the whole theater. They throw on the house lights, and it's one of those old time theaters where there's a stage up front. Police officer takes the shoe store manager up onto the stage and says, "Can you point out the man?" And Johnny Brewer, the shoe store manager, kind of looks out in the movie theater and points at Oswald, who's 3/4 of the way back in the movie theater sitting alone. Police officers walk up towards Oswald. They get to his row and they start walking towards him. They later on claimed that he jumped up at this point and yelled out, "This is it," and then punched the police officer and and Oswald, they claimed, went for his gun. At that point, half a dozen police officers jumped on Oswald and started beating him. Oswald starts yelling out, "I am not resisting arrest. I am not resisting arrest." They take him out of the movie theater, throw him in a police car, take him to the police station, and then he starts going through his interrogation process.
Thank you. Do you think, based on the John F. Kennedy Jr. interview that he had with Cuban leader Fidel Castro, that Cuba, or him specifically, might have had something to do with the assassination behind the scenes?
I don't think so. Back in 1961, had given approval for the Bay of Pigs invasion, where we basically tried to overthrow Castro. We also had Operation Mongoose, a CIA operation that was trying to assassinate Castro. So Castro had every right, in his mind, I guess, to overthrow or assassinate the American president, because we were trying to do it to him. We had also just been through the Cuban Missile Crisis. But I think, Castro was a realist. He also would have realized, if I assassinate the American president and it gets traced back to me in any way, that is the end of me. That's the end of my country. So I don't think that Castro had anything to do with Kennedy's assassination. And I don't, from all of my studies, I don't find any really clear evidence that that's the case.
And just my last question to wrap this all up: what is your current theory about how the events actually went down?
I think Oswald was on the outskirts of the conspiracy. I think there was a conspiracy. I think the CIA was more. Now, when I say the CIA, the problem with conspiracy theories, and the reason why people are called conspiracy nuts, is because when you say CIA, everybody assumes that means the entire organization. I'm talking about rogue elements within the CIA. Kennedy and the CIA did not get along. As a matter of fact, he fired Allen Dulles, who was the director of the CIA since its inception, and he fired him over the Bay of Pigs fiasco. And he also threatened to shatter the CIA, in his words, into 1,000 pieces. And he actually had his brother Bobby, who was the attorney general at the time, basically run the CIA as well and oversee the CIA. So there was no love between CIA, the deep assets in the CIA who had been there forever, and John Kennedy. Kennedy was viewed as not being strong enough against the Soviets and against the communists. It appeared that this kind of bubbling war that was coming with Vietnam, Kennedy was going to pull back from, and that upset the Cold Warriors as well. So I believe that the CIA was involved. I believe that the CIA used assets, maybe mafia, maybe Corsican mafia, maybe other assassins that aren't tied and can't be tied to the CIA to get this done. Oswald kind of lived in that shadowy world between the CIA and anti-Castro Cuban elements and so forth. And so I think he had an inkling as to what was going on. And I think when he declared, I'm just a patsy, that I've been set up, I think that's kind of the Rosetta Stone moment. He is basically saying that I didn't do it. I didn't shoot Kennedy. And there's no evidence that he was on the 6th floor. There's no evidence that he ever held that weapon in his hands. And by saying, I'm just a patsy, he's saying, I didn't do it. But he's also saying something else. He's saying, if you say I've been set up, then you must have some knowledge that there is something out there to set you up.
I want to give one last thank you to our guest speaker, David Savino, and I want to close this video out by answering what are my opinions on this case. I personally am under the belief that while Oswald was likely involved in the shooting itself, he was not the sole executor. And because of his former theatrics in the USSR, such as an attempted suicide just to persuade the Soviet government into accepting him as a citizen, this made him the perfect fall guy for an unspeakable crime. What are your thoughts and theories? Do you think Oswald did it, or do you think he was just a patsy? Leave your opinions in the comments below, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye!